Hey everyone, welcome back to A Very Queer Book Club. Today I'm sitting down to chat with Isabelle McCalla from the Prom musical on Broadway, so I'm super excited about that. We're chatting about the prom, You Should See Me in a Crown, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, when they shook up Thanksgiving, and much, much more. So if you've not purchased your copy of the book, you can still do that by following the link in the description below to purchase that from Kids Inc. And without any further ado, this is Isabelle McCalla. Well, hi, Isabelle. Thank you so much for joining me. For those of people that might not, know your work, will you just introduce yourself briefly real quick?
Absolutely. My name is Isabelle McCalla. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an actor. I most recently was on Broadway in a show called The Prom musical, where I originated the role of Alyssa Green. Yes, and you're wearing the beautiful "We're All Lesbians" t-shirt from that show. Yeah, and I act and I do a little bit of activism when I can as well.
Amazing. So I would love to chat a little bit about your experience with the prom, because I saw it I'm from Atlanta, so I saw it in Atlanta for a couple times, and then it moved to Broadway as I was moving to New York. So I would love to hear a little bit about your experience, your involvement with the show, how you first got involved, and then you actually kind of bumped up when it moved to Broadway. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So funnily enough, first I should say what The Prom is about. The Prom is a show that centers around this girl named Emma, who is a lesbian in Indiana, and she is not allowed to take her girlfriend to the prom because the PTA just won't allow it. And so they cancel it. Her story is reached by these four Broadway celebrity type principals who the show opens on opening night of Eleanor, the Eleanor Roosevelt musical. And they get horrible reviews and they have to close. And so they decide to revamp their careers by becoming celebrity activists. And then they find Emma's story on Twitter and they decide to march to Indiana, which similar setting as the book, to right this wrong and, get this girl the prom she deserves. And naturally chaos just ensues. Everything falls apart. So I got to join this beautiful show when it had its out-of-town tryout in Atlanta. I was in the ensemble at that point, and it was actually the first show I'd auditioned for post-college, yeah. So it was the day after my showcase, and I went to a dance call, and I didn't get it because I broke my ankle, I sprained my ankle like a week before final callbacks. But then I went in for Casey Nicola, the director of the prom, for a few other projects, and didn't get those either. But he got to know me in the audition setting, I suppose, and felt like I would be a good fit for the show continued to move on. And so I got to go to Atlanta and be a part of this incredible original show. And I loved every second of it. I was in the ensemble, so I was dancing my butt off.
And the dance in the show is just out of this world.
It is just 2.5 hours of cardio for the ensemble. And it's kick-ass, it's relentless, it's high octane, super fun. Yeah, I loved it. And then I got to watch like great actors like Beth Level and Brooks Ashmanskas and Angie Shore and Chris Sieber do their thing together as the four actor celebrities. And so I learned a lot in that time period. And the way I ended up becoming Alyssa Green was that during that run, I had to audition for Aladdin, the national tour, because they were casting that at that point. And I ended up getting the role of Jasmine on that national tour, which was amazing. Also directed by Casey Nicola. And so I think because Casey Nicola got to see my work as a principal actor for the first time on that tour, he felt comfortable enough to suggest that I take over Alyssa Green when they were looking for a shift in the character. In Atlanta, the character was a cheerleader and she wasn't all that, grades weren't important to her. And they decided that they wanted to bring her into the 21st century and make a popular girl smart, which I love. And so they were going in a different direction and they were like, we think you could play this part. And I was so grateful that they trusted me enough to tell this girl's story.
And so when you talk about a little bit, because I mean, obviously it was a very huge show in terms of queer representation.
Mm-hmm.
How did it feel to be telling? I mean, because in many respects, Broadway is like the world's biggest. People call it the biggest stage. What was it like to tell this kind of big queer story on such a massive scale?
It was everything. It was daunting, terrifying, exhilarating. The thing is, I knew that both Caitlin Kinnunen and I, she played Emma and I played Alyssa. We both knew the responsibility we had because there were so many girls that hadn't seen themselves represented like this on a Broadway stage or on screen sometimes even. And we knew that we wanted to represent authentically. We didn't want to make it caricature-y or bring no stereotypes into like the typical lesbian or gay, relationships that are out there. So we love the fact that Emma and Alyssa were two very different, full-blooded girls who happened to love each other. And it was a privilege. It was like the best experience I got. And I love theater because I think at its best, it can be a tool for activism. And I think the show was social activism because the girls who came and saw it wrote to us and told us they had seen themselves represented for the first time. And some were brave enough to come out to their families after the show. It gave them power. It gave them a safe space to say, I'm not crazy. I'm not alone here. There's so many of us. And throughout the show, I kind of came to terms with my sexuality as well. And I am now out as bisexual, but it was something I always knew, but never spoke about or said or felt the need to identify as. But the show gave me as much strength as it gave our fans. And I think that's really incredible.
Oh, and you mentioned people coming out, because of the show. I think I just spoke with the author last week, and she actually, the day You Should See Me in a Crown was announced, her mom flew to New York and they saw the prom together. And that night she came out to her mom. And
what?
Yeah. And so I was chatting with her last week and I was like, yeah, I'm chatting.
Oh my gosh.
And so was there any, I'm sure there were people at the stage door. Can you talk a little bit more about what that experience was like? Because I'm sure that had been incredible.
It was. That was the best part of the show, is connecting with the fans and hearing their stories. I would at the stage where we'd be out there for 30 minutes because everybody wanted to talk to us. And it was young girls. It was older men. It was people who were still figuring out their sexualities, families that were broken, families that, one that broke my heart was this girl told me, she gave me her playbill to sign, and I signed it. And she said, I just want to thank you because I've never felt so represented on stage. I saw myself in Alyssa as someone who is so terrified of coming out. And my mom is at the end of this line and she doesn't know I'm gay. And I'm from a town that doesn't support me and where my friends make fun of gay people. And I want you to know that this really has shaken me and I'm going to try to find that. And that was heartbreaking, but also reminded me of why it's so important, why the show is so important, and it is a catalyst for change because it showed that you are worthy, regardless of who you love. And I mean, at the state, there were a couple times on the other side of that, the more happy side, there were people that came out to their families right there, and the moms were crying and hugging, and I saw a lot of love, and I'm so glad that the fans got to share that with us too.
Yeah, well, and on on the prom still, on an even bigger scale, I would love to talk just briefly about the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
Yeah.
I remember, I will never forget watching that. I mean, I've been out to my family since freshman year of high school and it's been great. So I've had a very different experience than a lot of people. But I remember sitting and watching that with my family and being like, wait a minute, that didn't just happen on our TV. And not thinking that it was going to turn into a huge thing like it did. But I was like, wait a minute, we just saw two girls kiss on the Macy's Thanksgiving. Yeah. What was that like? First of all, getting to do that and knowing that was happening, but then also the backlash that then came from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. First, it was freezing the day of.
Yeah, I'm sure.
That first and foremost. But more importantly, we had a camera blocking rehearsal a couple of days before the parade, and our director Casey was looking at the monitor. And after the rehearsal, he pulled myself and Caitlin aside, and he said, they're not shying away from the kiss. They're going to show it. This is going to change so many people's lives. We're going to make history on Thursday. And Caitlin and I looked at each other like, oh my gosh, I knew that to be the case, but I didn't feel the responsibility and the excitement until that moment about what this one kiss represented. And I remember on the day of having so much adrenaline and pulling away right before we kissed and just looking at Caitlin with like our breaths freezing in air. But just looking at her and being like, oh my God, here we go. This is it. And just that I wanted to make it as good and passionate and real as it possibly could be. And it felt great, and we got done, and automatically Twitter erupted. And It was incredible to see the talk about it, because regardless of the negativity, there were a lot of negative comments. I think one organization, I can't remember who they said our children's innocence has been ripped from them this morning, which I loved because it is ridiculous, first and foremost.
Right.
But what I loved was that kiss was a part of the Thanksgiving dinner conversation for so many people. It validated so many families that look like that, because it wasn't overly sexualized. It was just a tender, sweet moment
between children,
between children.
But
and so
there wasn't anything sexual about it. Exactly.
Not at all. It's just love, pure at its purest, most basic form. And families talked about it. Families had to reckon with their own feelings about how they treat people in the LGBTQ community. How are they comfortable seeing it? Are they not? Why aren't they? They had to unpack everything. And I think it was a little piece of activism on that day. And for all of the hate that we got way more love. I mean, just so much more support. And yeah, it was pretty incredible. I will always mark that as one of the best moments of my life.
Well, now I would love to chat a little bit about You Should See Me in a Crown.
Yes.
What are your thoughts? Just your first initial thoughts.
Okay. Relevant, incredibly relevant. It's so funny to read it in an election year, because it just feels an election year where we're also having this huge rise in the Black Lives Matter movement as well, which is equally as important. Mm-hmm. But it gave me so much anxiety. I'm rooting for Liz Leidy, who is a great heroine. I think it's relevant. It's real. It's so well written. And you have a great heroine that you can root for, which I think is incredible. So that's my first basic reaction to it. I'm loving it, along with the anxiety of, oh my God, what's going to happen this campaign? I mean, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts specifically.
Yeah, well, are there any specific moments so far that of what you've read that are sticking out to you in terms of maybe the queer representation that maybe has been missing from media or anything in general? Yeah,
well, I think, first of all, having a heroine who is incredibly intelligent, right? She is a high valedictorian in the bag. Who just talks about falling in love as any other. There's no comment on it. It just plays itself out. It just is, right? And then what she does comment on is how their prom in Indiana will not allow gay couples, and she speaks about it with this tone of just exasperation, because it is so outdated. And so it's nice to have a heroine who doesn't question those parts of herself, and that it just plays out the way that all of our childhood crushes do,
right? Which
I think is pretty awesome. And Mac is so cool. Yes. I mean, great introduction to that character, just late bumbling, but really fun, sweet, down to earth. Yeah, I think they have a really, really sweet connection. And also what I love is that while it is a story about a queer girl, it doesn't override the character's journey. It's not ultimately about the relationship, but the relationship guides her in that way, with support. And I think that's beautiful. And happy stories are so important.
Right. Just fluffy, lovey,
queer representation.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We needed no trauma. It's really nice. That's what is good for kids to read, because then they'll be like, oh, my life doesn't have to be
sad,
so difficult. Yeah,
Right.
it doesn't have to be sad. I can, yeah. But what I love is that what breaks my heart, what I love about it is that Liz feels like she doesn't deserve to take up the space
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning of the story, which frankly, I mean, I understand that feeling where, if you were a nerdier girl who is a person of color in a predominantly white school, there, and you're gay on top of it, there's another thing that, because teenagers are mean,
Mm-hmm.
just mean. So you're so afraid of being yourself and taking the spotlight.
Yeah.
Because what will you lose by doing that? And I loved reading about her journey and owning her space and coming into her own.
Yeah. One thing I want to, not to, because I want to continue talking about this book, but also The Prom was also turned into it.
Yeah.
I just think it's so cool to see. I mean, The Prom was a couple years ago, or it came out last year, but like we're seeing these like lesbian stories being told on these big platforms. But I think I would love to hear your thoughts just on the differences in some of the storytelling. Because I mean, I feel like Liz, like you were saying, I feel like is a little bit more owning of who she is than maybe Emma kind of let Emma and Alyssa let themselves.
Yeah.
And I would just like, what are your thoughts just so far on like the differences maybe in just also the couples?
I think there's a little more. I think because The Prom is centered on the relationship a little bit more, in terms of the whole question is centered as like, can you be gay in public, right? Like this is what we're grappling with in The Prom, and that in You Should See Me in a Crown, it's more, or at least where I am with it, it feels more organic and natural, and it's not as scrutinized.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not as much trauma surrounding that relationship. And I think The Prom, while it's funny, you don't get the comedy from the teenagers, you get the comedy from the adults.
Mm-hmm.
So Emma and Alyssa, where we are meeting them a year and a half into their relationship.
Right.
So we don't get to see them fall in love. Whereas in You Should See Me in a Crown, you do see the spark, starting with her green eyes and like the hair that's asymmetrical, but like the little details you notice.
Mm-hmm.
That is something you miss in terms of, or that's just what the different representation of these two couples. And I think there's something when you're at the beginning of a relationship that is a little more playful and more tentative, but like your personalities can be bolder in that sense. Whereas like in The Prom, we're just dealing with everything around us and trying to get back to the simplicity of, I just want to dance with you. I don't want this relationship to determine my worth, or also this book of centering on like the prom being everything in Indiana, and it's like this whole culture, and the fact that there would be $10,000.
Right, just like, come on, where is that?
I mean, clearly our priorities are off, which is why I feel like, I mean,
right,
if it feels like just a nice view into like, this is what we value, when it's like actually the relationship down here with Mac and Liz that is important, and that's what matters, not like getting the 30. It's a popularity contest, so it's difficult.
Yeah. Well, and one thing you've mentioned that this focuses more about Liz, because I mean I love The Prom, but I love that we're seeing, and You Should See Me a Crown, it's completely centering around Liz. I feel like The Prom kind of duets this story of the adults, and but I also love, in The Prom we see Barry kind of come into himself because he never went to prom, and like we see that. So I think that I love that, but I do love that we're seeing this fully fledged main character that is a Black lesbian. Like I just think that I just love that.
It's so powerful.
It is. Do you think, with what you've seen so far, fans of The Prom would like You Should See Me in a Crown, or vice versa? Do you think they kind of
absolutely? I think they do. I think well, first of all, it's a prom-centered Indiana lesbian story.
Right. Exactly.
So those are two things. But also, like you said, I think representation is incredibly important, and we need, the most underrepresented people are the Black women of America, and that's women with an X, like trans women too. So we need to support those stories and validate smart girls who are Black women of color, Black queer women of color. And she's so likable. And what I also love about this book is that her friends are great. She has a strong group of girls who read her mind. Like Gabby's right that she's telepathic almost, and all of her friends are diverse. They're different characters. They're written so specifically. So not only is it good queer representation, it's great femme representation as well.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the more powerful, positive stories that are written about these girls, the better, because then people who read them will feel just as emboldened. So yeah, all prom fans should read if you should.
I love that.
Seen it.
Well, and I know you obviously know Alyssa and Emma a little bit better because you did embody them for her. But I want to know if you as Emma were planning a double date with Liz and Mac, where would you want to go, do you think?
Ooh, well, I gotta say Applebee's.
Yes.
Because of the prom connection.
Yes.
And for those that don't know the prom, it's just, we make a joke that Applebee's is the only restaurant in town. Right. So it would have to be Applebee's, apples and bees as they're lovingly referred to. But we could get a great appetizer sampler, we could each have quesadillas, mozzarella. I think there would be enough diversity on the plates to go around. Yeah, it would be fun. I think it's a chill and a vibe where they all could meet and not be worried about. Yeah.
I want to know, outside of the prom and senior con, what other stories do you love, whether it be theater or books or movies that have that representation? Because I know at least I was hungry for it when I was young, and it didn't really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so now seeing so much of it is incredible.
I totally get that. Children of Blood and Bone, that it's a book trilogy. It is so spectacular. The first two books that takes place in Africa, so it's a great Black representation with a female protagonist. That is phenomenal. I've read the first one. I have the second one at home. I'm very excited to start it. The Power by Naomi Alderman is one of my favorite books of all time, and it goes chapter to chapter of different women and different colors and different sexual orientations, all powerful, all very incredibly smart, and it's set in this dystopian universe where where women are the more elevated sex, if you will, and more powerful sex because of a power in their bodies. They can literally spark electricity from their arms. It's great. So that's really good in terms of female representation.
I also would like to just shout out, in the same year that you guys were on Broadway, another show was completely overlooked by the Tonys as well, Head Over Heels. There was so much more representation on Broadway.
That was great. Yeah, it is phenomenal. And Bonnie Milligan and Taylor Iman Jones are fabulous together. So also the representation, the diverse.
The first
Peppermint.
The first trans originated a role on Broadway. I don't know how.
Also, Pose.
Yes.
Pose. That's fabulous representation. Talk about celebrating trans women, and specifically Black trans women. And
the ballroom culture that has shaped. That has shaped all of gay culture. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's so important to pay tribute to the roots of the culture. And I think that shows a great representation of that. I think of other ones. What else? The L Word, the new Next Generation.
Yes.
That's pretty great. That's fabulous. I know Gentleman Jack's a little fun too, but that doesn't have as much diversity racially, but it's a fun queer story. I would say those are my top recs at the moment.
And I want to know, do you have any, whether it be because you're a performer, advice for maybe young performers or just young people in general that are either looking for representation or wanting to take part in creating the representation?
Yeah, I would say don't try to be anyone else. Part of, I think it's very easy to compare yourself to other people in this field, and to play the why did they get that and why didn't I get that. But like one of the best things I've learned is that another person's success does not mean that you failed. And the more that we can support each other, the better. And then in terms of representation, if you're trying to go into this field and now we're having this debate over what stories are certain people allowed to tell, I think a lot of that, as we shift our perspectives, we all need to ask ourselves those questions. Can I authentically portray this race? Do I have a right to authentically portray this race or a queer representation? And I think it's a case-to-case basis based on the story that is being told, based on the character that is written. But I think if we all move forward conscientiously and kindly, we'll work out the kinks together. So yeah, don't take every part just because you get it necessarily. Make sure that you can authentically play it, and also don't compare yourself.
Yeah,
that would be it.
And what are you doing during quarantine during quarantine and also during all of this massive and important, civil rights movement happening, to find joy and find peace and stay healthy and, mentally all good?
Yoga, meditation. Those are two things that are grounding for me. And also a cup of coffee in the morning. If I have like 3 things for routine, that keeps me sane. But also what I'm really enjoying recently is I've been phone banking for the upcoming elections and for NARAL and various candidates that are more progressive and liberal. If you want to help out, votesaveamerica.com is a great resource. Also Swing From Home on Instagram. Yeah, they're great. That's been great because I have enjoyed getting to talk to people about what is important to them and the issues they're dealing with during this pandemic. And oddly, talking to those people makes me feel less alone, because obviously we're all going through this crazy time in quarantine together separately.
Yeah. And so in terms of representation and just the future for you, what do you hope for yourself personally? I don't know because I'm sure no one really knows what's happening, especially in the world of theater. But like, what are you hoping to do in terms of yourself, career-wise? Is there anything, or is there anything you can talk about exciting that you're getting to do coming up? Not that anything is really happening right now, but
I don't have anything exciting career-wise for me at the moment, but that's okay. What I hope to do is I hope to continue to tell stories like The Prom that are pieces of social activism. I would love to see more stories about mixed families and mixed humans, because there are many of us out there, but aren't stories written about the mixed perspective. And I hope I continue to get to play like really smart women, queer women if possible. But I want to tell stories that are uplifting and strong, whatever medium that may be, whether it be theater or film or television. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. This was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Of course. And I hope you enjoy the rest of You Should See Me in a Crown.
Yes, I'm so excited. It's great. I love it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Next week, I'm sitting down with my dear friend Kayla, who is an educator, to chat about You Should See Me in a Crown. And then the next week after that, we'll have our panel discussion with a group of readers. So I'm super excited about that. So until then, have a fantastic one.